Snow fell the way old memories return. Softly at first, then with the weight of everything that had been waiting to be felt. It gathered along the faded shingles of Eliza May Calder's lonely cabin, turning the abandoned edges of the world into a muted, white hush. Inside, the air held a kind of stillness that did not belong to winter alone, but to a life lived without footsteps approaching the door. The single window flickered with the fragile glow of a kerosene lamp, a light so faint it seemed unsure of its own purpose, as if even fire forgot what warmth was meant for in that forgotten place. Eliza moved through her cabin the way a ghost might cross its final haunt, quietly, gently, careful not to disturb the thin peace she had managed to build from scraps. Her coat hung beside the door, worn to the color of old oatmeal, and she touched it every morning before stepping outside, as though asking permission to face the world again. She wrapped it around herself and stepped into the cold, her breath rising like a prayer that dissolved before reaching the heavens. Her days were crafted from repetition. She gathered firewood in small bundles that barely warmed the stove. She boiled snow for water. She mended the same patched shawl by candlelight. There was no cruelty in her routine, only a steady kind of survival that came from being forgotten long enough to believe one must not ask for more. Townsfolk passed her path sometimes, a wagon wheel creaking, a rider's horse snorting frost, but no one slowed to speak. Someone once said she liked being alone. Someone else said she'd driven her family away. Gossip, once thrown into wind, never dies. It simply circles long enough to shape the truth no one questioned. Still, Eliza held her chin with a tender sort of grace. She did not resent the town. She simply no longer expected anything from it. On Sundays, she heard the church bell through the pines, a hollow ring that reached her like a reminder she had never been invited to Christmas dinners or community suppers. The bell carried warmth meant for others, and she learned to nod politely at the sound, as if acknowledging a world that had long ago closed its door to her. On this particular morning, the sky wore a color so pale it looked washed clean by sorrow. Eliza's gloves, thin as onion skin, let the cold bite her palms while she lifted another branch onto her small pile of firewood. Her breath trembled. Her lips were cracked. Her hair had loosened from its braid, stiffened by icy wind. She paused at the tree line, staring toward town where smoke from dozens of chimneys rose in cheerful plumes. Christmas was 2 days away. She wondered if they still decorated the church with pine garlands. She wondered if children still sang on the steps, cheeks flushed with laughter. She wondered if anyone noticed she had not stepped inside a store for over a month. She pressed her fingers to her coat, feeling the frayed seam she hadn't had thread to mend. Shame was a quiet companion, never loud, but always near. She whispered to no one, "I'll make it through another winter. I always do." Saying it aloud made it feel possible, and she turned back toward her cabin, wood piled against her chest. The snow deepened around her boots, swallowing each step as though erasing where she had been. Inside, she knelt beside the stove, coaxing a small flame from stubborn logs. As sparks rose, her face softened with relief. Light always softened her features, revealing the gentle beauty time and hardship hadn't managed to erase. She held her hands close, letting the warmth sting her skin in that painful, healing way frost-kissed flesh responds to mercy. She sat on the edge of her cot, knees drawn close, and listened to the wind press its cold palms against the cabin walls. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what Christmas might feel like if someone remembered her. A knock on the door. A shared meal. A gift not out of pity, but out of care. But dreams like that were dangerous. They made the loneliness sharper when they faded. So she let the thought drift away like smoke slipping through rafters and steadied her breath. Afternoon crept in. Light thinned. Shadows climbed over the floorboards like slow water. Eliza rose to refill her lamp before night swallowed the room, yet even as she moved, she felt that familiar ache inside her chest, the ache of wanting connection but fearing what someone else's gaze might reveal. People had judged her long before they ever knew her, and she had learned to live invisible so she would never again feel the sting of being unwanted while standing fully in sight. By dusk, snow thickened into a steady curtain. She folded herself into her coat and stepped outside once more to check the woodpile. The wind tugged at her braid, lifting strands that shimmered with frost. Her breath rose in soft clouds. And then, unexpectedly, she paused. Tracks, large ones, cut through the snow near the far pine. Not wagon tracks. Boot prints. Heavy. Deliberate. Someone big. Someone who had walked toward her cabin rather than away from it. Her heart beat faster, though not from fear alone. No one came this far without purpose. She scanned the trees, but the forest offered only silence. The prints were fresh, filled with barely settled snow. Whoever had made them had been here moments ago, perhaps watching, perhaps deciding whether to knock. Eliza swallowed hard. Her pulse fluttered like wings trapped behind bone. She backed toward the cabin, unsure whether to call out or hide. Inside, she closed the door gently, leaning against it as if bracing for a truth she was not prepared to meet. Her breath trembled in the cold air. Her mind replayed the size of the prints, the depth of them, the slow, confident pattern. Not the steps of a stranger passing through. The steps of someone who had stopped. Someone who had lingered. And as she pressed her palm over her heart, steadying the trembling there, she did not yet know that the one who left those tracks, a giant of a man with snow on his shoulders, would return before dawn carrying something she had never expected to receive, a Christmas meant for her. The storm had not yet settled when Jonah Whitlock rode along the timberline, guiding his mare with the careful steadiness of a man who had learned to move through the world quietly. Snow clung to his hat brim and gathered across his shoulders, softening the broad silhouette that once intimidated ranch hands and unsettled townsfolk who mistook silence for severity. Jonah did not correct their assumptions. He rarely corrected anything spoken about him. Words, once released, tended to drift far beyond a man's reach. But he held his truth close the way others held their breath in winter, tight, disciplined, and mostly unnoticed. His route that evening was not accidental. He took the long way home, skirting the path near the old Calder cabin, though he told himself it was only to check the fences. In truth, he had begun noticing the faint glow from Eliza May Calder's window long before he realized he was looking for it. He'd seen it flicker during storms when most lamps were already out. He'd seen it steady during harsh winds that made his own walls groan. That small, stubborn flame felt like a heartbeat he didn't know he was listening to until the night it almost went dark. Jonah had paused then, reins slack in his hands, squinting through the gusting snow. When the light returned, dim but present, he felt an unexpected relief move through him. It was strange, he thought, how a life could remain invisible to a town yet become unmistakable to one pair of watchful eyes. He never approached the cabin. Respect held him back, or perhaps fear of disturbing whatever fragile peace Eliza had built around herself. Still, he took note of things. The thin smoke from her chimney, the way her woodpile shrank too quickly, the hesitant footprints she left near the creek. He had a knack for observing small details, a skill shaped by years of listening more than speaking. When he reached his ranch gate, the cold wind shoved at his coat, reminding him he should hurry inside. But his thoughts stayed behind near the quiet cabin. He tied his horse, stomped snow from his boots, and stepped into the warm hush of his home. The fire he'd banked earlier was still burning, casting coppery light across the wooden walls. His chair waited beside the hearth, the same place he'd sat through winters thick with memory and silence. He hung his coat, rubbed warmth back into his hands, and tried to shake off the feeling that someone out there, someone fragile, someone alone, was being swallowed by a winter too hard for one set of shoulders to carry. Jonah poured himself a cup of strong coffee and sat, letting the heat seep into his palms. The ranch was quiet except for the faint pop of settling wood. He should have felt the comfort of stillness, but instead he experienced a tug, subtle at first, then undeniable. A memory surfaced, a promise he once made to someone now buried beneath stones and seasons. Don't turn away from people who need help, Jonah. Even if they act like they don't. He exhaled slowly, the breath long and threaded with the ache of loss. Winter had a way of pulling old wounds to the surface, letting them sting just enough to remind a man he was alive. The next morning, he rode into town for supplies. The general store was warm, bustling, filled with the usual pre-Christmas frenzy. Parents buying sweets, ranchers stocking up before the roads iced over. Jonah moved through the aisles with purpose, keeping to himself. Mrs. Harlan Pike whispered something to Deputy Reed, both of them glancing his way before pretending they hadn't. Jonah neither bristled nor bowed. He had grown immune to being misunderstood. Yet today, their chatter thinned into silence the moment he reached for a bundle of woolen cloth. Soft, modest, The kind meant for a woman who needed warmth more than decoration. "Buying gifts, Jonah?" Mrs. Pike asked, her voice stretched with curiosity rather than kindness. "For Christmas," he replied simply, the words measured, offering no elaboration. "Who for?" she pressed. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence held its own truth, and though the town would twist it into gossip before the sun dipped behind the hills, he did not allow himself to care. He paid, nodded once, and stepped back into the cold with the bundle tucked beneath his arm. Snowflakes melted against his cheeks like fleeting touches he didn't dare interpret. Jonah's mare trotted steadily as he rode toward home, but his mind wandered to the cabin at the edge of town. He pictured the threadbare coat Eliza wore, the hollow look he had glimpsed once when she walked past the mercantile pretending not to shiver. He imagined the quiet courage it took to keep living in a place that had forgotten her. He imagined the weight of rejection she carried not on her shoulders but inside her chest, where warmth rarely reached. By the time he reached the ridge overlooking Calder's place, the sky had lowered into a dull silver haze. Smoke drifted weakly from her chimney. Her woodpile looked even smaller than before. Jonah's breath tightened. He knew, with a certainty that felt older than his own bones, that doing nothing now would haunt him more than any misstep. He turned his horse down the slope, snow creaking beneath hooves, each step deliberate. As he approached the cabin, he slowed, scanning the tree line. The prints he'd left the night before were still visible, softened but not erased. He felt a strange mix of regret and hope curling beneath his ribs. Regret that he had turned away. Hope that he might not need to a second time. He dismounted slowly, the bundle still tucked under his arm. The cabin looked smaller up close, humbler, almost shy. Light glowed behind the frosted window, soft, uncertain, like a flame trying to remember how to burn. Jonah stepped forward, boots sinking into snow. He hesitated only once before raising his hand. And just as he drew breath to knock, he heard movement inside, a soft, startled shift, as though someone had sensed him through the door, as though loneliness itself had paused to listen. The knock echoed through the cabin like something unfamiliar, almost foreign, as if sound itself hesitated to disturb the quiet life Eliza had built from silence. She froze beside the table, fingers gripping the edge, breath caught in the cold air. No one came to her door. No one ever had. The world had long ago learned to pass her by without pause. Yet now, someone stood outside, their shadow settling across the frost-painted window with the weight of intention rather than accident. She stepped forward cautiously, heart beating a rhythm she hadn't felt in years, hope braided with fear, each thread tugging her forward and pulling her back in the same trembling moment. Jonah waited in the snow, hat in hand, not trusting his breath to leave him steady. He hadn't rehearsed a single word, though he'd spent weeks imagining what he might say if courage ever outweighed hesitation. Snowflakes clung to his hair, melting into dark streaks that slid down the broad line of his jaw. He looked both too large for her small porch and somehow exactly where he needed to be. When the door opened a careful inch, he saw only her eyes, wide, startled, unsure, and he softened immediately, lowering his gaze in respect. "Eliza," he said, voice low, gentle, carrying warmth like a lantern held out to someone lost in the dark. "It's Jonah Whitlock. Didn't mean to startle you." "You didn't," she replied, though her voice trembled slightly, betraying the truth. She opened the door enough for the cold to slip in and for him to see the thinness of her coat, the way her fingers hid inside frayed sleeves. She looked at him, not with distrust, but with a question she hadn't learned how to speak. He lifted the bundle he carried. Brown paper. Twine. Snow dusted across the top. "I brought you something," he said quietly, almost apologetically, as though kindness might offend her if spoken too loudly. Her brows drew together. "For me." He nodded once, steady but nervous in the smallest human way. "For Christmas." The word fell between them like a fragile ornament set on uneven ground. Eliza stared at the bundle as though it were a memory she'd misplaced. She hadn't received a gift in years, not since her world frayed at the seams and left her standing alone in the threads. "I didn't," she swallowed. "I don't have anything for you." "Don't need anything," he replied. "Wasn't expecting anything. Just wanted you warm." Warm. Such a simple word. Such a dangerous one. Her fingers curled at her sides, and she stepped back, motioning faintly for him to enter. Jonah crossed the threshold slowly, mindful of the smallness of her space, careful not to bring in too much snow or too much presence at once. The cabin felt different now that he occupied it, still humble, still quiet, but no longer empty. His height nearly brushed the rafters. His breath stirred the shadows. Eliza closed the door behind him, suddenly aware of every beat of her heart. She stood near the stove, rubbing her hands together out of habit rather than need, for his presence warmed the room in a way the fire never had. Jonah hesitated in the center of the cabin, then placed the bundle gently on the table, as though setting down something that mattered more than cloth ever could. "May I?" she asked, touching the twine. "It's yours." Her fingers trembled slightly as she pulled the string loose. The brown paper unfolded to reveal a dress, simple, sturdy, deep forest green, and a thick shawl woven with care. Not fancy, not showy, chosen with the quiet dignity one gives to someone whose worth has long been underestimated. Her breath caught. She brushed the dress's fabric, and her eyes shone as though the softness stung her more than the cold ever had. "You bought this for me." The words sounded fragile, as if she feared they might crumble if said too boldly. "I did." Jonah shifted his weight, unsure how to stand under the weight of her astonishment. "Saw your coat. Knew this winter had more teeth in it than you should carry alone." She lowered her gaze. Shame flushed her cheeks, but beneath it a budding warmth grew, one she did not yet know how to trust. "Why would you do that?" she whispered, not accusing, but genuinely bewildered. Jonah paused, searching for truth rather than comfort. "Because nobody should spend Christmas cold," he said. "And because some folks deserve more than they've been given." His voice softened further. "You're one of them." Her breath shook. Without meaning to, without wanting to be seen so clearly, she turned her face away. Jonah pretended not to notice. Instead, he stepped back, giving her space, letting the moment breathe rather than forcing it into a shape she wasn't ready for. "You don't owe me anything, Eliza." His tone was steady, firm with sincerity. "Just wanted you to have something that said you weren't forgotten." The fire crackled softly, as if agreeing. She lifted the dress again, holding it against herself, the fabric catching the warm glow of the flames. A strange feeling rose in her chest, light, painful, hopeful. She had forgotten the way kindness could hurt before it healed. "I don't know what to say," she murmured. "You don't have to," he replied. "Not tonight." They stood there in the hush of winter, two souls used to solitude, unsure how to bridge the distance between them but drawn irresistibly toward the attempt. Jonah watched her carefully, not with hunger or expectation, but with a steady patience she had never known from another human being. Outside, snow thickened. Wind brushed against the window like a restless traveler seeking shelter. Jonah took a small step toward the door, sensing her overwhelm. "I'll head out," he said softly. "Didn't mean to stay long." Eliza looked up quickly, almost instinctively. The idea of him leaving carved an unexpected hollow inside her. She said nothing, but the silence between them shifted, subtle, tentative, full of something new. Jonah reached for his hat, then hesitated. "If you need anything, anything at all, you knock on my door. Don't matter the hour." She nodded, though her voice refused to rise. He lingered only a second more, long enough to offer her one final, gentle look, a look that told her she hadn't imagined any of this, that kindness could still find her in a world that had once turned its back. And then, as his hand touched the doorknob, something outside moved, heavy, deliberate, close enough that both of them felt a subtle tremor beneath the floorboards. The sound outside did not repeat, but its echo lingered in the wooden bones of the cabin, humming just enough uncertainty into the air that both Jonah and Eliza held still. Jonah's hand tightened around the doorknob, his posture subtly shifting, not alarmed, but guarded, the way a man accustomed to protecting others prepares without making a scene. Eliza took a step closer, instinct more than decision, as if drawn toward the one presence in her life who did not bring danger. The silence that followed was thick, snow-muted, watchful. Finally, Jonah cracked the door open just enough to peer through. Wind swept in, sharp and icy, brushing against their ankles like something alive. Nothing moved in the dark beyond the threshold. Only falling snow, branches swaying, the hush of winter pretending innocence. He eased the door shut again, slower this time, as though sealing in the warmth between them. It was probably just the storm shifting the pine roots, he murmured, though he wasn't entirely convinced. Eliza could hear the slight tension underneath his calm, a taut string pulled but not breaking. Her breath released in a small, trembling sigh. When he turned back toward her, his expression softened, the worry melting into something gentler. "You're safe," he said, steady and certain. "You're not alone tonight." The words landed in her chest with the weight of a truth she hadn't expected to experience again. She nodded, unable to speak, the fire's glow flickering like hope practicing how to stand. Jonah glanced at the dress on the table, the shawl folded neatly beside it. "If you're willing," he said quietly, "I thought maybe you might join town for Christmas service tomorrow." His voice carried no assumption, no pressure, just an offering made with care. Eliza felt her stomach tighten. The thought of standing among people who once erased her with glances, whispers, and silence made her pulse race. "I haven't been in years," she whispered. "They won't want me there." Jonah shook his head gently. "You come because you choose to, not because they choose you." He paused. "Let me stand with you. Folks behave better when they don't think someone's alone." A soft flush warmed her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from the strange, unfamiliar safety he created simply by speaking. She looked at the dress again, running her thumb along the hem as though memorizing the fabric. "I don't know if I remember how to be seen," she admitted. Jonah stepped closer, not crowding her, but offering presence the way others offered warmth. "Then let them see you with someone who does," he replied. "That'll be enough." His confidence wasn't loud. It was quiet, grounded, real. It made something inside her shift, like a door long rusted finally remembering it can open. She drew a long breath. "I'll try," she said finally, the words soft but brave. His smile, small, rare, unpolished, flashed like a lantern lifting in the dark. "That's all I'd ask." He glanced toward the stove. "Before I go, let me add more wood. You'll sleep warmer." Eliza tried to protest, but he was already kneeling, feeding the fire with slow, practiced care, the flames brightening as though responding to him. Something about watching Jonah perform simple tasks felt tender, his hands steady, his movements respectful of her space, his silence never heavy. It had been so long since anyone had done anything for her without expecting something in return. When the fire crackled with new life, he rose and brushed ash from his palms. "I should head back," he said, though neither of them moved. "Storm will lay deeper tracks if I wait too long." Eliza stepped toward the door almost unconsciously, as if drawn by a thread she didn't know had been tied to her. "Thank you," she whispered, and the words carried a depth beyond gratitude, an echo of loneliness relieved, if only briefly. Jonah nodded once, the gesture firm but warm. "I'll be by in the morning." He opened the door, letting a gust of cold rush in before stepping out into it. She watched him descend the porch steps, snow crunching beneath his boots, his tall frame dimming into the winter dusk like a guardian fading into legend. Inside, the cabin felt changed, not louder, but less hollow. She touched the dress again, unfolding it fully now, letting the color spill like a forest reborn across her hands. She held it against herself and turned toward the dim window, imagining how she might appear among others. She considered leaving the shawl for tomorrow, but her fingers clung to it, pulling it close to her chest as though it held warmth even before she wore it. Night deepened. The fire glowed steady. Eliza lay down, shawl draped over her shoulders, unsure whether sleep would come. But exhaustion and something softer, trust, maybe, pulled her under. She dreamed of footsteps that didn't turn away, voices that didn't fade, a door opening rather than closing. Some time later, a faint noise stirred her. Not loud, not threatening, just enough to break the thin veil of sleep. She sat up slowly, the cabin dark except for embers pulsing like fading stars. For a moment, she thought the wind had shifted again, pressing against the walls. But then she heard it, a soft crunch of snow outside, deliberate, too measured to be the storm. She held her breath. The sound came again. Not hurried. Not careless. Her eyes drifted toward the window, where moonlit frost shimmered. A silhouette passed by, slow, unmistakable, not Jonah's. The shape was too tall, too thin, edging toward the door with a caution that felt nothing like the steady, respectful weight Jonah carried. Eliza's heart hammered. She reached instinctively for the shawl, clutching it around herself like armor. A shadow paused at her porch, the faint outline visible through the frost-coated glass. The cabin seemed to shrink around her, every breath loud in her ears. Whoever stood outside did not knock, did not speak, only lingered, as though deciding whether to come closer, or whether they already had a claim to something inside. And in that trembling silence, Eliza realized the winter had brought more than one visitor to her door. Eliza did not move at first. Fear held her as still as frost clinging to the window. The shadow drifted across her porch again, long and searching, as if mapping the shape of her small existence. She pulled the shawl tighter, the fibers pressing against her throat like a promise of safety. When the shadow paused directly in front of the door, she felt her pulse climb into her ears. Whoever it was stood too close, too quietly, the way danger behaved when it wanted to be mistaken for wind. She backed toward the stove, unable to decide whether to call out Jonah's name or bite down on her voice and pray the stranger left on their own. But before she could choose, the crunch of heavy snow echoed from a distance, growing louder, firm, grounded. A horse's snort cut through the silence. A man's boots followed. The porch creaked under sudden weight. The old wood had learned the difference between wandering threats and a protector returning too soon to be coincidence. Jonah's silhouette appeared through the frost-lit haze, shoulders squared, presence unmistakable. The shadow bolted into the darkness the moment Jonah stepped forward. He saw movement, just enough to track a direction, but did not give chase. His priority was the trembling woman behind the door. "Eliza," he called gently, voice steady but edged with urgency. "It's me. Are you all right?" She exhaled shakily, her fear breaking into a relief that softened her entire body. She moved to the door and opened it just enough to see his snow-dusted face, breath rising in pale clouds. "Someone was here," she whispered. "Standing right where you are." Jonah looked past her shoulder, scanning the shadows as snowflakes caught in his beard. "Did they try the door?" "No, but they didn't leave." Her voice trembled. "Not until they heard you." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him with careful force, placing himself between her and the night. The cabin warmed at once, as though reacting to him the way she did, quietly, instinctively. "I shouldn't have left," he murmured, guilt knitting through his voice. "Storm or no storm, I should have stayed." She shook her head. "You didn't know." "I should have," he said again, softer now, as if speaking to a past wound only he could see. He had once arrived too late to save someone. He would not make that mistake again. "I'm staying here tonight," he added, his tone gentle but immovable. "By the door. You can rest." Eliza wanted to protest, but the memory of the shadow outside still gripped her breath. "All right," she whispered, surprising herself with how much comfort the word carried. Jonah dragged a chair toward the entryway, settling into it with his hat tilted forward, boots grounded firmly as if anchoring the cabin itself. He did not look at her when she moved toward her cot, giving her privacy without stepping away from his word. Hours passed in a silence that was no longer empty. The fire dimmed into embers. The storm settled. Eliza drifted in and out of sleep, waking to the steady sound of Jonah's breathing. Quiet, deep, steadying. She watched him through half-lidded eyes, studying how his large hands rested open on his thighs, how even in rest he held himself as someone prepared to stand the second she needed him. Morning crept in slowly, gold edging across the frost on the window. Jonah straightened when she stirred, offering a faint nod as if greeting a moment he had been waiting for. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, sitting up with the shawl still wrapped around her. "I slept better than I have in years." His shoulders eased, as though those words unlocked something inside him. "Good," he murmured, glancing at the door with the protectiveness of a man who'd kept watch through more than winter nights. "We can ride into town now. Church service will start soon." But only if you want to go. The fear from the night before lingered at the edges of her thoughts, but something else had grown stronger. The memory of Jonah standing on her porch, turning shadows into nothing with his mere presence. She looked at the green dress folded neatly across the table. "I want to go," she said. "If you're with me." "Always," he replied, and the word felt less like a promise than a truth that had been forming since the first night he saw her lamp flicker in the storm. Eliza dressed slowly, smoothing the fabric over her frame. The mirror on the wall, small, silvered by age, caught her reflection, and for the first time she did not look away. Jonah turned only when she stepped toward him, breath catching for a moment he didn't try to hide. "You look—" He searched for the right word, the truthful one. "Like someone the world should have never forgotten." Her eyes softened. "Thank you for remembering me." They stepped outside into fresh snow, the sun rising behind them like a gentle blessing. Jonah lifted her onto his horse with the careful respect of a man carrying something treasured. As they rode toward town, the fear of the night faded, replaced by anticipation that fluttered like wings beneath her ribs. The church bells rang as they arrived. Heads turned. Whispers stirred. Some eyes widened in judgment. Eliza had expected that. What she hadn't expected was the quiet dignity that rose inside her as Jonah dismounted and offered his hand, steady and certain. She placed her fingers in his, letting herself be guided down with a grace she didn't know she still possessed. Inside, the warmth of candles lit her features. Jonah stood beside her, shoulders protective but not possessive, presence grounding her without overshadowing. A few people looked away, unsure how to react to a woman the town had once erased. But others, slowly, unexpectedly, nodded. A silent acknowledgment. A beginning small enough to fit in the palm of her hand. When the service ended, snow began to fall again. Light, slow, gentle. Jonah helped her into the saddle, but before mounting behind her, he paused, sensing something. Tracks. Near the edge of the churchyard. The same shape as the ones outside her cabin. Eliza followed his gaze, her breath catching. The shadow that had come to her door had followed them here. And winter, for all its silence, was not done testing the warmth they had only just begun to build.